Shalom and welcome everyone to the ICEJ's webinar series. It's great to have you with us again today. And we're talking today about the Israel-Iran war. And this, of course, Israel and Iran, since the Islamic regime took over in Tehran in 1979, they've been bent on destroying Israel. 45 years or more now of this campaign, but always through proxy militias. But for the first time, even after years of shadow war between the two countries, for the first time, Iran directly attacked Israel the other night, last weekend. And to help us talk about that whole episode and all the fallout, all the implications of it, its aftermath, we have our good friend Elliot Chodoff. He's an IDF major in the reserves, 35 years in IDF service, and he also wrote training manuals and other IDF materials for the troops. And he's in the Home Front Command in northern Israel, still with the IDF. It's good to have you, Elliot.
Good to be with you.
Okay, Elliot's just one of the, he's become a good friend and one of the trusted military, I don't want to say experts, but just specialists in analyzing the IDF. And because he lives in the north, he's got a good handle on Hezbollah and their backers in Iran. And Elliot, this was quite a weekend last Motzei Shabbat in the night. Everyone is expecting something. And then around midnight, the fireworks start. Can you give us a sort of a wrap of what happened?
Yes, well, as you said, first of all, very important that the war did not begin on Saturday night. It began in 1979, and it goes back even further than that to Khomeini's writings and his antecedents. But on Saturday night, we saw a quantitative and qualitative shift in the aspects of that war. Israel and Iran have been kind of shadowboxing each other, and as you mentioned, proxies. I would go further than that because Hezbollah isn't really a proxy of Iran. It's more a subordinate. I call it a wholly owned subsidiary of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Quds Force. So it's been almost there, but never quite at the point of Iran launching a direct attack on Israel from its soil to Israeli soil.
That's pretty remarkable.
Yeah. And of course, on top of that, if they're doing it already, they launched the largest missile strike in history, well over 300 missiles with drones, cruise missiles, and ballistic missiles. Plus, nobody's talking about the 100 rockets that were fired by Hezbollah into the Golan simultaneously. So we're talking about a combined attack of enormous proportions. The IDF estimated that the Iranian element of it included over 60 tons of high explosives in all of those different projectiles. So we're talking about a major attack. This was not a symbolic attack. And what that basically means is the mask is off, the gloves are off. We are in a direct war with Iran, and now the question for Israel, the strategic question, is what to do about it. Now, complicating it, kind of paradoxically, is the combined effectiveness of the Israeli air defense system that included all sorts of different layers of anti-missile defense, as well as the Air Force itself using aircraft, flying eastward and intercepting some of what was fired way to the east, using aircraft launched munitions, and the coalition of the United States, Britain, France, and Jordan, who facilitated, engaged, took out some of it. I beg to differ with President Biden's statement that America and its allies defeated the attack. No, Israel and its allies defeated the attack. But why quibble? But the fact is that over 300 missiles that were fired, 2 landed in Israel, in an Air Force base in the south at Nevatim. They caused a very, very minor damage. They didn't put the base out of action even for a second. So now, paradoxically, what do you do when a good part of the world is saying, "Well, no blood, no foul," you know, or as Biden put it, take the win and go home. And this really complicates the situation, an already complicated situation. So that's where we're sitting at the moment. As you said, we knew about it, and that's also part of Israeli intelligence, American intelligence. Apparently, the Saudis played a part in informing us. I should also add that a strike of that size is very hard to keep secret when you're being watched closely. Another one of those paradoxical things. You can launch 5 rockets secretly. It's hard to launch 300 missiles secretly. They need to be moved and fueled and set up and all of that sort of thing. So very, very good intelligence, very good coordination, superb action on all of it. And now the question is, what does Israel do about it?
Yeah. What's the proper response? Look, we're seeing some of these, the IDF's rolling out some of these fuselages of these ballistic missiles. They're huge and really massive. But I have described this. I mean, it's first time that Iran has directly attacked Israel from their own soil. That makes it historic. And the largest ever simultaneous barrage. I remember around midnight, it was announced the first drones had taken off, as you say, good intelligence. 20 minutes later, the second wave of drones have taken off. They're taking off from different areas. Everyone could see it coming. Then the cruise missiles that take a couple hours, and then the ballistic missiles take 15 minutes. And Iran had done this before, a coordinated simultaneous attack in Saudi Arabia.
Yes.
And that was like 17 drones and 3 cruise missiles, and it did great damage. Was the U.S. involved in the Saudi defense? They had Patriot missile batteries. It just they weren't expecting it.
The U.S. was involved, but the launch came from directions that it wasn't anticipating. And here again, I think that you're pointing up a good illustration of the paradox that I was talking about earlier. It's easier to sneak 17 drones in than it is, 300 or 200. Yeah. So it did a lot of damage, in part because it was a sneak attack, and nobody was really prepared for it. Mm-hmm. Here, of course, we had a buildup of the Iranians saying they were going to do it, which put everybody on alert. I don't know how much of an effect that had, because I'm imagining that our intelligence people, the Mossad is very much involved in this as well, are watching them very, very carefully, and so their open statement may or may not have been instrumental in it, but it certainly added another layer of, okay, let's keep a close eye on it. But once you know what's coming, it's easier to coordinate a response, and I'm choosing my words carefully. It's not necessarily easier to defeat the response, but at least to coordinate the response to it. In the end, the defeating the response is superb coordination and operations, and that you only know in retrospect. We were, as you were, we were watching it all come in, and having no idea what tomorrow morning was going to look like.
Yeah. You were live on I-24 News after the launches. I guess they got you up at night and wanted your views, and we're all sitting here like drumming our fingers saying, okay. Is it going to be 2 o'clock, 2:30? I mean, it felt like I'm from the Outer Banks of North Carolina, Hurricane Alley, and you're sitting there waiting for the hurricane, and when's the eye going to pass and all.
It's coming, but
coming. Yeah. it was quite interesting moment in Jerusalem. I heard some booms, and it sounded like way up in the air, the way it echoed over the hills around
Right.
us. Heard several booms before the sirens ever went off in
Mhm.
Jerusalem around quarter till 2 in the morning, I think it was. And that was interesting. I think, we can talk about it, the different layers of the Israel's air defense
Right.
to deal with drones, to deal with cruise missiles, and then the ballistic missiles. There's different systems to defeat each. But as you said, the intelligence was excellent. It's not
Yes.
only the U.S. satellites, U.S. intelligence, but Israel itself, understand, has enough satellites that they can time one to pass over. They can have a satellite passing over Iran every 15 minutes.
Yes, and I would say that's one layer of it. There's other electronic listening and watching going on, and there are certainly people on the ground, whether they're Israelis or Iranians working with Israel or whatever. But we're talking really about a multi-layered intelligence operation. It also points up, David, I think importantly, the that when the intelligence services want to really track something, they're capable of doing it. In
Hmm.
contrast to what happened on October 7th, where everybody was sort of saying, well, they're deterred. Let's not worry about it too much and let's not pay too much attention to it.
Uh,
Uh, the, the, the capability is certainly there. It has to be focused.
yeah.
And in this case, it was focused, and we see the result. And October
Yeah.
7th, it wasn't focused, and we see the opposite result.
Yeah. Yeah, the intelligence was there, and it's quite interesting. Israel in the evening canceled schools for the next couple days. They already knew it was coming
Yes.
and didn't know what all the fallout would be. So, but the largest simultaneous barrage of drones and missiles, cruise and ballistic missiles ever in history. And it just seems that the way I've described it, it was a legendary success for Israel and its allies and a colossal failure for Iran. Is that a fair assessment?
That's a perfectly accurate way of putting it. Um, I'm sure they anticipated many of them being intercepted, which is why they fired as many as they did. And I don't think it's a tremendous secret that what they were trying to do was what would be in sports terms flood the zone. Uh, you know, multi-targeted, multi-layered, overwhelm the system rather than finesse the system.
Yes.
And Israel showed that it's perfectly capable of handling, you know, that quantity
Hmm.
plus the the different types. And I'm going to take a guess. You mentioned earlier that you heard interceptions without before the sirens went off. I'm going to guess that those were the ballistic missiles, and I'll tell you why.
It's upper atmosphere.
A, it's upper atmosphere, and something else. When a ballistic missile is fired, or a rocket for that matter, which is essentially a tiny ballistic missile, once it's launched, its target is predictable. In other words, it's flying on a parabolic ballistic arc. If you pick it up, you know more or less where it's going to land. Okay, and when I say more or less, close, more or less, and the further it flies, the smaller that sort of it's called an ellipse of error gets.
Hmm.
Uh, so knowing, for example, that the ballistic missile was aimed for, let's say, for our purposes, Nevatim Air Base in the Negev, there was no reason to set up to send off alerts in Jerusalem. The interception may have been somewhere over the Dead Sea, for example, which you would have heard in Jerusalem, um, but it's not targeting Jerusalem. In contrast to that, a cruise missile or a drone exactly and is under control. So on the receiving end, you don't know what its target is, you only know its general vector. And anywhere along that general vector, and it can also change that because it's got the ability to shift, but anywhere along that vector, it can be decided that that's the target.
This is why the Saudis and Jordanians had to shoot down drones and cruise missiles, because they could fall on their territory.
Exactly. They didn't know. And to be honest, they were cooperating here more with the United States than with Israel, but I'll take it any way I can get it.
Yeah, they're acknowledging it, and that's good.
Yeah.
But they have a low trajectory to stay below radar.
Correct. But as I said, more importantly from the defense perspective, because it can be picked up. Today there's look down radar. There are all sorts of ways of picking them up and tracking them. But from a defense perspective, you don't know anywhere along its path where its target may be.
That's right.
So it could be flying near Jerusalem and still have the same target as the ballistic missile. But anywhere between point A and point B, it can be ordered to go down and hit. So it's going to set off far more alerts, red alerts for our purposes, but far more alerts along the way than a missile would, knowing that it's going to be coming down in a particular area.
Okay. So the ballistic missiles, they were fired last, but really probably one of the first to arrive, but they have this high trajectory into the upper atmosphere and then coming down, and are fairly accurate, but it's the thing to remember, it's a huge missile and a huge warhead. It can do a lot of damage.
Correct.
And it's the Arrow 3 and then the David Sling is a second. The Arrow 3 is the upper atmosphere defense. And it's probably better than the Patriot 3, I understand.
Yes, because the Patriot, with all due respect, was an anti-aircraft missile that was so superior that it was pressed into anti-missile service. And it does, I'll call it a moderately good job. It's an excellent battlefield missile, but it's much less good as a civil defense missile. Because on the battlefield, just to explain the point, you're trying to prevent it from hitting a particular target, a headquarters, an air base or whatever. If you have a near miss in the interception and you divert it and fall somewhere else, that's a successful engagement. As we saw during the Gulf War in '91, engaging an incoming Scud that was aimed for Tel Aviv and dropping it in Ramat Gan is not exactly damage. It doesn't do it for us.
Yeah.
So it's a less good alternative for the civil defense needs that we have, although it certainly has its place in the array. And I should also mention, you talked about the arc of the ballistic missile. Because of the nature of its flight, it's easiest to hit at the highest point of its arc because that's when it's traveling the slowest.
Yeah. Yeah, like on a roller coaster before it's coming down.
Think of throwing a ball in the air.
Yeah.
Even throwing it straight up, and I think is the best way to illustrate it. It goes up, it's slowing down as it ascends, and there's that moment where it's actually standing still before it comes down again.
It's a moment of weightlessness. I've been a surfer all my life, and a wave picks you up, and before it drops you, you feel that moment of weightlessness. That's when you got to jump up and get on your feet. So, but it's almost weightless at the top, just like on a roller coaster, and then it starts coming down. Okay, that's the moment to hit it. You've got the Arrow 3, which is joint U.S. Israeli funded. Yes. Some of it manufactured in the U.S., but most of this is Israeli ingenuity.
Yes.
Radar and the interceptors and such. And then the David Sling, which is sort of intermediate.
Right.
And these ballistic missiles were coming for around 2,000 kilometers, 1,400 miles. That's a pretty long distance. Iran has been trying to develop them with like 6,000-mile range to hit the East Coast.
They are working on that. And they've actually launched a couple of those in test launches.
Through what they call their space program, launching satellites, but it's really testing ballistic rockets, missiles. Yes. Yeah, and then the Iron Dome isn't much use here because it's only from about a 3 or 4 mile to maybe a 40-mile range of rockets coming in. It's proven itself for these shorter range rockets from Hamas and Hezbollah,
Right.
but it won't deal with these ballistic missiles
No, it
necessarily.
won't deal with the ballistic missiles. It might deal with cruise missiles and drones
Yes.
under the right circumstances.
Yeah. But the reason you've got to get these, you got to go out drone hunting and cruise missile hunting well ahead of time, because so many of them coming and you don't know, they can be maneuvered in different directions and evade everything. It's, you got to get them as soon as you can.
Well, you have to get them as soon as you can. You know, there's a general rule, to paraphrase Sun Tzu, the Chinese strategist of 2,500 years ago. Your first line of defense shouldn't be your last line of defense. So if you can get out there and thin it out and make it more manageable by the time it gets to you, so much the better, because once it gets past that last line, it's going to hit.
So we understand that most of all of the drones did not, none of them reached Israeli airspace. They were all shot down over Iraq, over Jordan, over Syria, and whatever was coming up from the south.
Yes.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And that was estimates 170, 180 drones at once. These are a smaller, faster drone than the ones they're giving the Russia to fight in Ukraine, but that makes them more faster and more maneuverable.
Exactly.
Less of a payload.
Yes. So here again, that's another one of the many paradoxes of strategy and tactics. The smaller weapons carry a smaller payload. They're harder to see. They're harder to intercept. They're cheaper, so you can make and send many more of them. But you know, if only a couple get through, they probably won't do all that much damage. But that's all part of that give and take of any sort of decision making launching.
Mm-hmm.
The bigger, the nastier the weapon, the slower, the easier to see, the easier to upfront defend against. But of course, if you fail, the more damage it's going to do when it comes in.
Yeah. And you hunt these down with primarily fighter aircraft. That's probably the best way to get them early.
Well, it's the best way to get out there, way beyond the range of the air defense, the ground air defense systems.
Mm-hmm.
The fighters have munitions now designed to take them out, keeping in mind that, you know, an F-15 or an F-35 is flying much faster than these drones are. So it's got to come up. There's got to be a technology to lock onto something moving that slow and intercept it. But we have it. We know how to use it.
Okay. Now, what makes this really such a legendary success and colossal failure? Help me with this. Israel, since 1967, when America realized, number one, you don't have to shed American blood to help defend the country like in Vietnam, but the Israelis know how to use advanced weapon systems. Israel, since then, has become like the proving ground for the latest advanced weapons in the Western world. And even right now, the F-35, most advanced joint strike fighter, only Israel has really used it in battle, and amazingly effective. And so Israel's and Western air defenses were up against the Iranian and Russian alliance, their latest offensive tactics, because their MiGs and other aircraft, they cannot stand up to Western aircraft in the air in any way. They prefer drones and rockets and missiles and big swarms of them all at once. And when this moment of testing came, it was a colossal failure and a legendary success for Israel, but embarrassment for Iran and the Russians.
Absolutely. First of all, you know, we've been engaging Iranian and Russian air technology and air defense technology in Syria now for quite a number of years. You know, and here again, the shooting war with Iran, not just the rhetoric war,
The
The
shadow
shooting
war.
war, well, but shooting
Shooting war.
has been going on now for quite a number of years in Syria,
Yes.
including and up to and including the strike that precipitated the Iranian response, going after Iranian targets in Syria. So and that's why I call it a shadow rather than a proxy war, because we have been hitting Iranian assets,
Yes.
and they've been firing at us as well from Syria. In other words, it's not just Hezbollah or Hamas firing, but Iranian call it troops, if you will, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, have engaged the Israeli military out of Syria. And we've been doing a lot over the years to try to limit that, to limit its resupply of and upgrading supply of Hezbollah. So this is not the first time Israeli/American technology has come up against Iranian/Russian technology, and it's also not the first time we've defeated it hands down. It's something that we've been doing repeatedly all along. So it's not a shock that the outcome was what it was. As I said, in all the years that we've been going after Iranian targets in Syria, and there have been times when that's been going on 3, 4, 5 times a week, they've managed to shoot down one Israeli plane, an F-16 that was a near miss actually, and it crash landed in Israel, not in Syria. So they don't really have a very good record on that side of the board either. But here, as you said, the escalation here, I would say, is more the qualitative one that it came out of Iran itself. The superiority of the Israeli and American systems is blatant, and let me add something else to something you mentioned before, because I don't know how obvious it is. Not only is Israeli testing American equipment, Israel is reporting that test. In other words, when something is found, and it's in positive and negative, something is found to work really well, or something is found not to work really well, Israel is very upfront about it to the United States, to the manufacturer. And I know that the manufacturers of the F-16, originally General Dynamics, now conglomerates, went on record saying that the Israeli combat reports that they received saved them years of R&D in upgrading the F-16. You can test it all you want in the lab and on the practice grounds. There's nothing like combat to really test a piece of equipment. And like I said, Israel's very upfront about saying, okay, this is what we learned this week.
Yeah, I'm sure everyone's reviewing their notes, but someone said that it's kind of like, I think it was the Battle Sharon at Chinese Farm, that military colleges are going to study what happened on the night of early Sunday morning,
Yes.
14 April, for years to come. And they're comparing notes, exactly what happened, and will be even better prepared for the next. But
Right.
There was some guy who did the mathematical probabilities of, even at your best, you might have shot down 90%.
Right.
Where everything is working, and yet this was around 99%, they said. And
it was 99 plus, yes.
Some of the missiles failed. They
Right.
landed in Iran, landed on the way, whatever.
Yeah.
But it's amazing he's a mathematician, but he said this was a miracle. Something supernatural intervened as well.
I never argue with miracles, David. You know that.
Yeah.
I think there's something else here that's worth noting. The drones and cruise missiles were supposed to be the be-all, end-all technology of warfare. I remember being involved a few years ago in discussions here in the IDF about, well, maybe we need to restructure our ground forces because of the threat of drone waves and that sort of thing. And I am vehemently opposed to that for the very simple reason that it's my contention. It's beyond a belief, because I can even use Saturday night as evidence of it, that the higher the technology gets, the shorter its shelf life. In other words, the drones might have been the be-all, end-all answer 5 years ago. All of a sudden, they're not anymore.
Yes.
And the counter technology has basically, I don't want to say eliminated them, but it's greatly neutralized their effectiveness.
It's with AI involved in computers and developing any new technology, you come up with the next version, the 3.0, 4.0, in
Exactly.
shorter time frames.
That's right. And the old one becomes obsolete very, very quickly.
Yeah.
The analogy that I use, and you're old enough to remember this as well as I, that growing up, we had a telephone on the wall that sat there for over a decade, and it was the same telephone. Today, if you have a phone that's 2 years old, it's a dinosaur and it's not working anymore.
Right. Yeah. And the next technology is the laser beams, and let's hope Israel stays. What's really amazing, and to me, the hand of providence, the sovereignty of God, that He's always allowing Israel to stay out at the edge, on the advanced edge. That's got to be frustrating for the other side. And when we say a colossal failure for Iran, and the Iranian-Russian method of projecting offensive power and their systems, this has to be embarrassing. And I think that there are Arab countries mocking Iran right now and saying, Israel's pretty good, we should align with them. Do you see the Saudis shifting that way?
I see. Well, I think the Saudis and the Jordanians already made that shift, which is why they were in on it in the first place.
Yeah.
Today, I imagine they're patting themselves on the back for choosing the right side.
Yes.
Because there is a gamble here. Here, let's also be clear that, with all due respect to ideologies, philosophies, beliefs, you want to be on the winning side.
Yeah.
That's important, especially in this part of the world. Being on the losing side could be the end of you.
Yeah.
And I'm sure, like I said, I'm sure they're congratulating themselves for choosing the winning side, in addition to going with their gut. And clearly, Iran is no friend of theirs. But I think that we're going to see a good deal of rethinking, not necessarily action at this stage, but rethinking as a result of that success, and frankly, as a result of America's active involvement in it. Here, with all due respect to Israel, it's the United States and its involvement and its leadership that really is going to make the difference in countries feeling comfortable going to this side or that. And America has always been a wild card in here. I'm not going to get into American politics. It's not partisan. It's both sides of both parties at different points have shown to be, let's just say, less than ironclad allies. And I'm not just talking about with Israel. And that makes countries nervous. So, America stepping up, being very clearly, I can't say in the lead because I don't believe it was leading, but it was certainly leading the coalition aspect of this. And fully coordinated with Israel, I think is a very, very positive and stabilizing message for the countries around the region.
Yeah, there is this isolationist wing in the Republican Party, and the Democrats trying to flip Iran, appease Iran, and in the process sort of abandoning Israel and the Saudis. They felt this under Obama and now under Biden, but this hopefully has changed things. The Biden administration, I thought it was interesting that both not only Benny Gantz from the centrist party that's in the war cabinet, he's one of the three main decision makers, but also Defense Minister Gallant. Israel needs to respond. It's urgent. We got to do it. But they came out the next day saying we need to really build upon this joint regional
Yeah.
alliance, the air defense alliance with Jordan, which apparently the Saudis did it because there were missiles coming from Yemen over their soil, and they've been hit from Yemen by the Houthis for years, and they can't allow it. As you say, they could come down anywhere. So they got to shoot them down as well. But when you're part of the detection, the intelligence sharing, and the response, and it's all coordinated around the region, it really hems in, really handcuffs what Iran has been trying to build for all these years. These proxy militias, we'll just use the term, in all these areas, ringing Israel and these other countries. So it could really shift things. I thought it was interesting to have Gantz and Gallant giving that message the very next day.
Well, look, both of them, I think, are excellent strategists. Now, in strategy, you don't necessarily have to agree with someone to say that they're excellent at it, because strategy isn't a simple one way, the only way. I think that they are looking at it. And at the beginning of our talk, I talked about how complicated and how complex this whole situation is. I was really referring to the strategic situation. It seems like, well, it's obvious they hit us, let's hit them back. That's tactical thinking. Strategic thinking is, but wait a minute. We have this coalition alliance that has value. How much value? Again, you can estimate, but it has value. It showed its value on Saturday night. We still have unfinished business in Gaza. We have not yet started business really in Lebanon. Right? We have the Houthis, we have the militias, we have Syria, we have Iran. Is this the time to do a feel-good response for Israel? And it's a fair question. In other words, yes, there's a value to it, and I'll if you'll permit, I'll give you my 2 cents on the question.
Yeah, I think people have tuned in, for this big question. What do you think is a proper response here at this moment?
Okay, so I'm going to throw something out that I'll need to explain. I don't think we should respond.
Oh my.
Okay, but that requires explanation. That was just a soundbite. I believe that what happened on Saturday night is a qualitative change in the war relationship between Israel and Iran. And what we've gone to, and we've talked about this, we've gone from the shadow proxy stage to the fully open stage. Israeli deterrence failed totally on Saturday night. Totally. Okay, zero. Iran
they felt emboldened enough to go ahead and strike directly for the first time in 45 years. They were cowards up till then.
That's right. And they took into account the possibility of retaliation, of Israeli retaliation, and that didn't stop them either. Okay? So now retaliation, first of all, happens when your deterrence fails. Now the question is this. Are we in a stage where we are going to rebuild deterrence? I believe the answer to that is no. And if that's the case, and if we're in open warfare with them, retaliation is an inappropriate response in warfare. You have to think strategically in terms of victory. We're not trying to send them messages anymore. The best historical example I can give is after Pearl Harbor, America didn't say, well, they sank 4 battleships and destroyed 200 planes, so we're going to sink 6 battleships and destroy 250 planes, and that'll teach them a lesson. No, we're at war, and now we're working toward victory.
Yeah, they did bomb Tokyo about 4 months later, but it was just symbolic and showing we're on our way.
Exactly, and by the way, that's interesting. It wasn't retaliation. It was actually the antithesis of retaliation. Because when you retaliate, you actually are admitting and ceding the initiative to the other side. Right? They act, you react. They act, you react. And the Doolittle raid, the bombing of Tokyo, was much more a sense of letting them know, no, no, you're not the only ones who are acting. We're also taking the initiative, even if it's only symbolic, so you don't feel safe, in your on your island.
If you don't respond now, you're showing you do have confidence, or else you're cowering in the closet. But that's not the case.
It's not the case, and again, when I say not to respond, that I didn't mean not to act.
Yes.
Okay.
Not a immediate retaliation. Yeah, it's
Well,
quite interesting. Even the delay so far is
right.
surprising to me.
Because I think the debate, the discussion that that you and I are having now is also being discussed in the highest echelons of the IDF
For sure.
and the government,
And with allies, because
and
it
with
impacts
allies.
them. Yeah.
Yes.
It would be different if Hezbollah at the same moment had unleashed not just 100 rockets, but thousands like it's capable of.
That's right.
That would have been different.
Well, yes,
And
here again, paradoxically, that simplifies decision making.
yeah, then you have to go into
You're at
Lebanon
war. You're at war.
and do it as quick as you can.
Yes.
Before it gets away from me, I want to ask a couple questions. Do you think Israel could have had at least uh, good, solid success if they had defended against all this on its own without U.S., U.K., Jordan, and all? If they had allowed, say, Jordan allowed Israeli planes in their airspace, how good would Israel have done on its own?
Probably not as well, because here again, the full picture is not just the interception by the coalition. It's the sharing of intelligence.
Yes.
It was the coordination of intelligence, the coordination of the response. I I can only guess, because what if games are always tricky. But I would guess that without the coalition, we probably still would have done better than the mathematicians' 90%. But my guess is that we wouldn't have been up in the 99%.
Okay, I just want to note for everyone, we're pre-recording this. Our webinar airs at Thursday at 3 p.m., but we're on Wednesday because of some travel commitments that I have. We're pre-recording it, so we don't know what's going to happen between now and airtime tomorrow. But as of now, we're both, it's surprising that we haven't seen an Israeli response, even with the pressure from within his own Likud party and to the right of him, Netanyahu hasn't ordered this. I find it interesting. Number two, Iran has admitted they were targeting the Nevatim air base in the south, down near Arad, east of Beersheba, which they say the planes that took out the two generals. This all happened because Israel took out 7 Iranian Revolutionary Guard commanders in a command center on the
Islamic
Iranian
Revolutionary Guard.
compound. Yeah, in Damascus. Okay, so they targeted a base in the Negev. They targeted the IDF base on Mount Meron, which is listening, intelligence gathering, air command, all of that. They've tried to hit it many times, and neither one got really heavily damaged. But the missiles coming over Jerusalem, they had to be targeting something else. That sounds like Ben Gurion Airport or something in the Tel Aviv area, because there were these missiles that were breaking up and parts flying over the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem. What else do you think they were targeting?
Could have been Ben Gurion Airport. There are Air Force bases in that area as well.
Yes.
So they could very well have been aiming for them. And they may have been aiming for some civilian targets that they weren't going to say up front. And once we intercepted them, they certainly weren't going to admit that they were aiming for purely civilian targets.
I think the point is that Israel and its allies were so successful in shooting down nearly every one of these drones and missiles that you really don't know what all they were targeting.
That's correct.
That's amazing. That's it's it's got a disadvantage, but it still will take it, you know.
Sure. Also, remember that as we said earlier, both drones and cruise missiles uh, can change direction. Cruise missiles by programming,
Yeah.
and drones by direct command electronically. So they could possibly have been aiming for air bases, not only Nevatim, they were also talking about Katserim near Beersheba, um, where they were coming in from further north. And they did this with the Houthi attack in Saudi Arabia as well, that by hooking and coming from 2 or 3 different directions, it would make it more difficult to intercept them if you waited until their last phase of approach.
Hmm. Yeah. What do the last big question is what is Israel going to do about Hezbollah? Many are saying May, June. I've heard you say it when you gave a briefing to a solidarity mission we had. We appreciate you taking us out in the Hula Valley in the north and showing us the terrain. And what are you expecting the IDF to do concerning the threat of Hezbollah?
I'm still looking at May, June, although the longer Rafiah is delayed, that could push that by another few weeks or so. But I don't see much later than late June, early July. Although a Rafiah operation, if it goes well, could be a 2-week, major operation, and then sort of reduce itself to what's going on now in other places in Gaza. And that would free up the force. And I'm talking about specifically the air and artillery support that would be needed for a ground offensive in Lebanon against Hezbollah. And the ground drying. The ground is still damp up here. It's wet under the surface. And tanks and other armored vehicles will turn it up into mud, and that's just not good for the Israeli style of maneuver warfare. So earliest, I would say mid-May. After that, it could be at any time. If Hezbollah doesn't wake up soon and say, you know what, this was all a big mistake, we're going home and we're stopping, and I don't see that happening, then I think we're going to have to go and push them back, because we cannot continue with 100,000 Israelis out of their homes as internal refugees. And we can't continue with the damage that's being done. It's not really reported that much, but the communities of northern Israel, I'm talking about along the border, have been devastated. Their homes have been destroyed. Their livelihood has been destroyed. Hezbollah is firing missiles and rockets on a daily basis, and not just 1 or 2 at a time. And that threat just can't remain in place.
Probably a lot more damage on the other side, but you can't tolerate it. You can't.
No.
Israel can't afford to just tit for tat. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if we do have a major explosion on the northern border, Israel's going to have to go in and make it quick, because you can't have more than 2 or 3 weeks of those massive barrages of rockets and missiles from the north.
That's correct.
Yeah. All right. And without the fireworks on Sunday night, it seems like we're in a bit of a lull, waiting between a Rafah operation and then maybe Lebanon, or a hostage deal, hopefully over Passover. That looks less and less likely right now. It's a shame.
No, Sinwar's under no pressure to make a deal.
Yeah, and he's calling the shots there, but we've been praying earnestly for the hostages to come home. But otherwise, we got this law. But I understand Israel. I think they've boosted the aid into Gaza, the food going in, and they pulled most of the troops out, partly because Hamas is hiding, trying to preserve their forces. But it was also to, I think, help improve the conditions to get a hostage deal. But the IDF pulled out of Khan Yunis. They'd been there for 2 or 3 months, and as soon as they pulled out, within 2 or 3 days, Hamas is back in control of the streets. That's not good.
Correct. One of the positive aspects from our perspective of the humanitarian aid, if we handle it correctly, and we're not there yet, is that doesn't leave a vacuum for Hamas to fill on the civilian side. The withdrawal of force from Gaza City and Khan Yunis, I see it in much less stark terms than it's being reported. I think, first of all, we finished the maneuver stage. A post-maneuver stage in a hostile environment is an extremely dangerous one. The initiative goes over to the other side. We began to see that. There's no way of stopping that. You're now in
open
control
to guerrilla warfare, to ambushes.
Exactly. It goes to classic guerrilla insurgency warfare, and you become the target. So pulling out makes tactical sense. The other thing to keep in mind here, pulling out of Gaza for Israel is not the same thing as pulling out of Afghanistan for America.
Yeah, it's next door.
Yeah, it's not a 10,000-mile, skip. It's right next door. And we saw last week the operation in Nusayrat that came out of the Negev. In other words, yes. All right, so instead of sitting in Khan Yunis and being 2 miles away, we're sitting in the Negev and we're 4 miles away.
Yeah.
And the same is true for an operation in Rafiq. It doesn't have to come through Khan Yunis. It can come through Kerem Shalom and be in there in an hour.
That's a good point. Well, I think we've covered a lot of material beyond this major attack, missile and drone attack by Iran on Sunday night. But it was an historic moment. I hope we've helped people understand the immensity of it and the impact, the fallout. It will be interesting to see. I think in closing, the one point that really is still sticking out there, that the U.S. has been working towards this alliance and getting Israeli-Saudi normalization, but it was more the U.S. demanding that Israel agree to renew a peace process towards a Palestinian state, and it'll be interesting to see if that is still a major obstacle in getting Saudi-Israeli normalization. I think the Saudis are ready to do it in order to confront Iran, and we'll worry about the Palestinians later.
I agree.
Okay. All right. That's our time for now. We want to thank IDF Major Elliot Chodoff, and he's in the IDF Reserves and the Home Front Command in the North, 35 years experience in the IDF, and really just a wealth of information and analysis on the security situation here and this new open, direct Israel-Iran war. We hope you've gotten a lot from it, and it's helped you also to know how to pray. That's it for this week on the ICEJ webinar series. We'll see you next week, same time Thursday at 3 p.m. Israel time.